In the sweltering heat of mid-August 1945, as the world reeled from the unprecedented destruction unleashed upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a closely guarded secret remained hidden within the corridors of American power. President Harry Truman possessed not merely the memory of 2 atomic bombs already detonated, but the immediate prospect of a third weapon that would fundamentally alter the calculus of Japan's surrender. This weapon, though never dropped, cast a shadow over the final days of World War II that historians have only recently begun to fully appreciate. The conventional narrative of the war's end suggests a simple sequence: Hiroshima on August 6th, Nagasaki on August 9th, and surrender on August 15th. This timeline, while factually accurate, obscures the tremendous pressure that the existence and imminent readiness of additional atomic weapons placed upon both Japanese decision-makers and American strategists. The third bomb was not some distant contingency plan sketched on paper by nervous scientists. It was a physical reality, a plutonium core being machined and prepared with a delivery date that would fall before Japan's government could fully comprehend what had already befallen them. The Manhattan Project's industrial architecture had achieved something extraordinary by the summer of 1945. It had transformed the creation of atomic weapons from a desperate experimental race into a predictable manufacturing process. At Oak Ridge in Tennessee, electromagnetic and gaseous diffusion plants separated uranium isotopes with increasing efficiency. At Hanford in Washington state, massive reactors bred plutonium from uranium fuel rods, producing the exotic element that formed the heart of implosion-type bombs. At Los Alamos in New Mexico, teams of scientists and technicians had refined the intricate choreography of explosive lenses and initiators required to transform fissile material into a weapon. This was no longer pure science. It was industrial production applied to the most destructive force humanity had ever harnessed. General Leslie Groves, the hard-driving engineer who had overseen the Manhattan Project since its inception, had established production targets that would have seemed fantastical just months earlier. The second plutonium core, destined for Nagasaki, had shipped to Tinian Island in early August. The third core would be ready by August 19th, barely 10 days later. Beyond that, additional cores would follow at intervals of 3 to 4 days initially, with the production rate accelerating as procedures became standardized and bottlenecks were eliminated. By September, Groves anticipated delivering cores at a tempo sufficient for 2 to 3 atomic bombing missions per week. The Manhattan Project had not reached its conclusion with Nagasaki. In many ways, it was just beginning to demonstrate its true industrial capacity. This production reality fundamentally shaped the strategic environment in which Japan's surrender unfolded. For American military planners, atomic bombs were transitioning from extraordinary one-time weapons to available tools that could be integrated into broader campaign planning. For Japanese leaders struggling to comprehend the implications of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the possibility that America possessed many more such weapons created a terrifying uncertainty. How many bombs did the Americans have? Could Japan endure another strike? Could it endure 10 more? 20? The inability to answer these questions with any confidence paralyzed Japanese military strategists who had spent years calculating force ratios and attrition rates using conventional metrics that suddenly seemed obsolete. President Truman's perspective during these crucial days reflected the burden of wielding such power with imperfect information about its consequences. He had authorized the use of atomic weapons against Japanese cities with the goal of forcing surrender and avoiding the catastrophic casualties anticipated in Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan's home islands. Military estimates suggested that invading Kyushu in November would cost tens of thousands of American lives in the initial landings alone, with casualties potentially reaching into the hundreds of thousands as fighting extended across the Japanese homeland. Japanese casualties, both military and civilian, could number in the millions as the population fought with the desperate determination demonstrated throughout the island campaigns. Against these projected horrors, the atomic bombs appeared to offer a terrible but efficient path to ending the war. Yet Truman was not unmoved by the destruction these weapons caused. When detailed reports from Hiroshima began reaching Washington, describing not just the physical devastation, but the human suffering of tens of thousands of civilians killed instantly, and many more dying slowly from radiation effects, Truman reportedly expressed discomfort to his cabinet about the mass killing of non-combatants. This discomfort did not lead him to halt atomic bombing operations, but it did create tension between his desire to minimize American casualties by forcing rapid surrender and his recognition that the weapons he commanded were fundamentally different from conventional arms in their indiscriminate destructiveness. The existence of the third bomb shaped this calculation in subtle but significant ways. Had the Manhattan Project produced only 2 atomic cores by early August, the strategic picture would have been different. After Nagasaki, American leaders would have faced an uncertain gap before additional weapons became available, potentially weakening their negotiating position. But knowing that a third bomb would be ready within 10 days, with more following rapidly, Truman and his advisors could maintain maximum pressure on Japan. The implicit threat was clear: surrender now or face continued atomic bombardment on a schedule that Japan could neither predict nor prevent. The target selection process for the third bomb reveals much about American strategic thinking in mid-August. The original target committee had compiled its list of cities based on specific criteria: military or industrial significance, size sufficient to demonstrate the bomb's destructive radius, and relative preservation from conventional bombing so that the atomic weapon's unique effects would be unmistakable. Kyoto had been removed from consideration despite its size and industrial capacity, a decision that would prove significant for post-war relations. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been struck from the list. This left Kokura and Niigata as designated targets, along with several cities that had been added to later evaluations. Tokyo emerged as the most likely destination for the third atomic bomb. This represented a qualitative escalation beyond even the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tokyo was not simply another industrial city or military installation. It was the political, cultural, and symbolic center of the Japanese Empire. The imperial palace occupied the historic heart of the city, surrounded by government ministries, military headquarters, and the infrastructure of national governance. An atomic bomb detonating over Tokyo would have served multiple strategic purposes, demonstrating that no location in Japan enjoyed sanctuary, eliminating key elements of the government and military command structure, and potentially killing Emperor Hirohito himself if he were present at the imperial palace rather than evacuated to a secure location. The implications of destroying Tokyo with an atomic weapon extend far beyond immediate military effects. Emperor Hirohito's role in Japan's surrender proved decisive. On August 10th and again on August 14th, the emperor intervened directly to break the deadlock within the Supreme Council for the direction of the war. The peace faction, led by Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, advocated accepting the Potsdam Declaration's terms with only the condition that the imperial system be preserved. The military faction, led by War Minister Korichika Anami, demanded additional conditions including no occupation, Japanese handling of war crimes trials, and self-disarmament. This fundamental division had paralyzed Japanese decision-making even as the strategic situation deteriorated catastrophically. Hirohito's intervention overcame this paralysis, but it was an extraordinarily close decision. A faction of mid-level military officers attempted a coup on the night of August 14th, trying to prevent the surrender announcement and continue the war. The coup failed largely because senior military leaders, despite their personal opposition to surrender, chose to respect the emperor's unprecedented directive. Had this coup succeeded, or had the emperor been killed in an atomic strike on Tokyo, Japan's path to surrender would have become far more complicated and potentially impossible to achieve without complete military collapse. The third bomb's plutonium core did reach Tinian Island, but by then Japan had announced its acceptance of surrender terms. Rather than destroying another Japanese city, this core was eventually used in the weapons tests at Bikini Atoll in 1946, becoming part of the early Cold War nuclear arsenal rather than a wartime weapon. The rapidity with which this transition occurred underscores how close the world came to experiencing not two but many atomic bombings in August 1945. Soviet entry into the war on August 8th added another layer of urgency to both American and Japanese calculations. Stalin's forces attacked Japanese positions in Manchuria, Korea, and the Kuril Islands with overwhelming superiority. The Kwantung Army, once Japan's premier military force, collapsed within days as Soviet tanks and aircraft demonstrated the lessons learned in 4 years of total war against Germany. For Japanese leaders, Soviet entry demolished the last hope of negotiating a conditional peace through Moscow's mediation. For American leaders, rapid Soviet advances raised the prospect of Soviet occupation of northern Japan, creating a divided country similar to the partition unfolding in Germany and Korea. This geopolitical competition likely influenced Truman's thinking about the pace of atomic bombing. Forcing Japan's surrender before Soviet forces could occupy significant Japanese territory became an additional strategic objective beyond simply ending the war. The existence of the third bomb, ready to drop within days of Nagasaki, provided leverage in this race to secure American influence over post-war Japan. Each day of delay allowed Soviet forces to advance further into territory that might become part of their occupation zone. The Japanese people, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the specific debates occurring within their government. Communications from Hiroshima had been fragmentary and confused, with military censors initially preventing full reporting of the atomic bomb's effects. Nagasaki's destruction came so quickly after Hiroshima that public comprehension lagged behind events. The government had not announced the extent of either city's devastation to the general population. In this information vacuum, most Japanese civilians understood only that the war was going catastrophically wrong, but not that their government was actively debating surrender. Had Tokyo been struck by an atomic bomb, killing potentially hundreds of thousands in the nation's capital, public awareness would have been immediate and undeniable. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan had already killed more civilians than the 2 atomic bombs combined. The firebombing of Tokyo on March 9th and 10th killed an estimated 100,000 people in a single night. Dozens of other cities had been systematically destroyed by incendiary attacks designed to maximize casualties and damage to wooden residential areas. By August, Japan's urban population had experienced months of terror from the air, with conventional raids often involving hundreds of aircraft dropping thousands of tons of bombs. The atomic weapons were revolutionary not because they targeted civilians, which conventional bombing had already made routine, but because a single aircraft with a single bomb could achieve what previously required massive raids involving hundreds of planes and crew members. This efficiency had profound implications for the third bomb and those that would have followed. The 509th Composite Group on Tinian Island had multiple specially modified B-29 bombers and crews trained for atomic missions. Unlike conventional bombing raids that required elaborate coordination of hundreds of aircraft, atomic missions involved a small strike package, one bomber carrying the weapon, accompanied by instrument planes and observer aircraft. This meant that atomic bombing could proceed almost daily if cores were available, without the logistical constraints of massing large bomber formations. The systematic atomic destruction of Japanese cities could have become routine by September, a prospect that makes the timing of Japan's surrender seem even more providential. General Douglas MacArthur, designated to command the invasion of Japan, had initially viewed atomic bombs with skepticism. As a conventional military commander, MacArthur focused on massing overwhelming force for Operation Downfall, the invasion that would ultimately employ millions of American servicemen supported by the largest naval and air armadas ever assembled. The atomic bombs seemed to him like a sideshow compared to this massive conventional undertaking. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated the bomb's strategic impact, MacArthur's assessment shifted. He recognized that these weapons had obviated the need for an invasion that would have consumed vast resources and lives. However, MacArthur also understood that successfully occupying and transforming Japan required preserving enough of the existing governmental and social structure to function. The complete destruction of Tokyo by atomic bomb might have eliminated too much of this infrastructure, complicating the occupation that MacArthur would soon command. The scientists who created atomic weapons held diverse views about their use in warfare. Leo Szilard and James Frank had advocated for a demonstration detonation, perhaps over an unpopulated area or a Japanese military installation with advance warning, hoping that shocking Japan without mass civilian casualties might be sufficient. These dissenting voices were overruled by the majority view that only the actual combat use of atomic weapons against cities would demonstrate their destructive power sufficiently to force surrender. Some scientists, including Robert Oppenheimer, supported this decision, but later expressed profound ambivalence about the weapons they had created and the destruction they enabled. Others, like Edward Teller, showed little hesitation and actively promoted development of even more powerful thermonuclear weapons. These divisions among the Manhattan Project's scientific community persisted throughout the Cold War, with some veterans becoming advocates for arms control while others supported expanded nuclear arsenals. The third bomb that never fell represents one of history's most significant near misses. In an alternate timeline that nearly came to pass, that weapon detonated over Tokyo or another Japanese city in late August 1945. The emperor might have been killed, eliminating the personal authority that proved essential for securing military compliance with surrender. The imperial system that MacArthur preserved to legitimize occupation policies might have been destroyed, forcing a much more difficult and contentious reconstruction. The demonstration of American willingness to destroy even Japan's most sacred symbols might have created lasting enmity that prevented the eventual alliance between the two nations. The post-war order in Asia might have developed along fundamentally different lines. Instead, Japan's surrender on August 15th prevented this catastrophe by the narrowest of margins. The timing was almost miraculous in its precision, late enough that Japan's military situation had become absolutely hopeless, with 2 atomic bombs detonated, Soviet forces overrunning Manchuria, and the home islands under blockade, but early enough that the third bomb had not yet been delivered for use. A delay of even a few days might have resulted in Tokyo's destruction before Japan's government could complete the complex process of overcoming military opposition to surrender. The apparatus for continued atomic bombing existed and was functioning efficiently by mid-August. The industrial infrastructure to produce fissile material operated at full capacity. The assembly facilities prepared cores with increasing speed. The delivery system stood ready on Tinian Island. The command structure had authorized continued atomic strikes without requiring specific presidential approval for each mission. Only Japan's surrender announcement halted this machinery. Without that intervention, the third bomb would have fallen, followed by the 4th, 5th, and 6th weapons in various stages of production. The uniqueness of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as singular war-ending events was not predetermined, but resulted from timing that allowed Japan to surrender before atomic bombing became a sustained campaign rather than an exceptional act. Understanding the third bomb's role in Japan's surrender requires recognizing that Japanese leaders knew or suspected that America possessed additional atomic weapons. This knowledge intensified the pressure on the Supreme Council and strengthened the emperor's argument that further resistance was futile. The peace faction could point to the certainty of continued atomic bombardment as justification for accepting terms that the military faction found humiliating. The emperor could frame his intervention as necessary to preserve the Japanese people from complete annihilation. Whether Japan would have surrendered after only 2 atomic bombs, without the implicit threat of a third and more beyond, remains unknowable. But the historical record suggests that American possession of an immediately available third weapon, ready to strike within days, contributed significantly to the calculations that led to surrender. The legacy of the third bomb extends beyond August 1945. The Manhattan Project's transformation of atomic weapons production from experimental to industrial demonstrated that nuclear arsenals could grow rapidly once the basic technical challenges were solved. This realization shaped Cold War nuclear strategy, with both superpowers building arsenals containing thousands of weapons rather than handfuls. the normalization of atomic bombing that would have occurred had the war continued. Beyond August 15th was postponed but not prevented. Instead, it re-emerged in the Cold War doctrines that contemplated using nuclear weapons not as exceptional war-ending devices, but as tactical battlefield weapons available in various yields for different military situations. The third atomic bomb that President Truman possessed in August 1945 never destroyed a Japanese city, but its existence and readiness fundamentally shaped the endgame of World War II. It represented not merely a third weapon, but proof that America could continue atomic bombing indefinitely until Japan surrendered. This reality, more than any single bomb's destructive power, ultimately convinced Japanese leaders that further resistance would achieve nothing except their nation's complete obliteration. In this sense, the third bomb accomplished its strategic purpose without ever being dropped, changing history through its sheer potential rather than its actual use. That it remained unused represents one of the war's most fortunate outcomes, preventing additional mass casualties and preserving enough of Japan's governmental structure to enable the remarkably successful occupation and reconstruction that followed.